Well, hello and welcome back to Faith, Philosophy and Life with me, Mr. Shelton. Today I am stood outside Buckingham Palace. Well, that's the image behind me anyway. It's a palace that the Queen lives in, a monarch, and today we are going to be thinking about a different monarch. We're going to be thinking about somebody who ruled and had authority over Israel. No, it wasn't King David. That ended in disaster last week. And no, it wasn't his son, which we'll learn about later, and the things he did with his wives. But enough of that. Before we carry on much further and we lose the plot, I would like to just draw your attention to the following announcements. Number one, you do need to have with you your workbook, which you downloaded in lesson one. If you don't have that, either re-download it or go and grab it. And you'll also need your timeline that you drew that we're going to come back to. You'll also need some stuff to make some notes in, but the booklet is the most important because you are going to be using that today. So this then is what we are doing today. We are looking at how the Jews got back to Israel. Okay, so our title today is How Did the Jews Get Back to Egypt? And that's obviously a bit of a leap because last time the Jews were still in Egypt with King David as their ruler, so that's going to make sense a little bit more as we go. Our learning objective is to explore what happened in Jewish history after King David, and so our literary objective is to transfer information from one source to another. If you need to get that title written down, do so now, please. Okay, so to save me repeating myself at any point during this clip, please feel free to pause and then do the work that's on the screen. You're probably fed up with me saying, now pause the clip. But there we go. So our outcomes today is a good outcome if you can retell the next events of the Tanakh's history. It's going to be great if you can explore how King David shaped the Jewish history through his successes and his failures. These are the same as last time, obviously. And even better if you can evaluate if the return to Jerusalem, that's the same era as last time, was as important as when the Jews entered the Promised Land. So we're thinking about forgiveness as our key idea. This is the overview then. We're going to look at Solomon, we're going to look at the exile, and then we're going to particularly look at the Queen Esther, or Queen Essie, as they call her in VeggieTales, which if you watch last clip, you'll understand what VeggieTales are. Singing, talking vegetables. Yep, you heard it here first. Do a quick Google if you don't know what I'm talking about, but Bob and Larry are my ultimate heroes. So we've looked at creation to Abraham, we've looked at Abraham to the Exodus. Last time we looked at Exodus to King David, and today we're looking at exile to the return. So this is where we're up to, but before we join in any further, let's cue the introductory music.
For those of you still watching PE with Joe, maybe we could do a little dance routine in that. I think that's probably the greatest thing I could actually do. So PE with Joe at 9 o'clock in the mornings, not PE with Mr. Shelton, all I'm saying.
So what happened was Solomon, which was David's son, the king, after David, married foreign women who persuaded him to follow their gods. So if you remember, the covenant was if they followed God, God would be their God and they would be his people. And here you've got the ruler, who is the person who is representative of the Jewish people, not doing what God wanted. And there is a consequence to that. So the Bible says that basically Solomon had over 300 wives and concubines. That's basically people that you do stuff to. And yeah, they were all foreigners. Now, again, big issue with that because Jews should only have married other Jews at that point. That was one of the laws. So the promise that was given to Moses was that if people would follow his laws, God's laws, they would stay in the land, and if they didn't, they would be taken off to exile. And that is exactly what happened. So exile is where the people are taken from their land. They were invaded by the Babylonians and some others as well, and they were taken to a land outside of the promised land. So the dream was over. So if we go back to our timeline, you can see there we did the Star of David last time. So we've now got the dagger, which is symbolic of them being taken to exile and the fighting that ensued, and then exile at the bottom. This is the lowest point. This is almost as low as when they were in Egypt. You can see there that just bounced back up a little bit, which we're going to come on to in a short time. So let's get the dagger drawn and exiled as well. Remember, pause this clip if you need to. Okay, now this is where we're up to. So the Jews have been in exile for a few hundred years. God, though, still did not give up on the Jewish people. They were still his people. And God then used different people to return some of the Jewish people back to the promised land once they repented, once they said sorry, once they had acknowledged their mistakes and God had forgiven them. Now there were a number of people that returned, and there were two people in the main. The Bible talks about a bloke called Nehemiah, who returns to Jerusalem and he starts to rebuild the temple, and that's the temple which you may know about in Jesus' time. When Jesus goes to the temple, that's the temple that's rebuilt. So it's not Solomon's temple that Solomon built. This is a second temple because the first one got destroyed when the Jews got exiled. We're, however, going to look at Queen Esther. Queen Esther was a Jew who married another person of another faith. Yes, I realise the controversy there based on what I've just said. But clearly this was God's blessing because she had a job to do. So Esther in the book of the Bible, it's a really short book. If you've never read it, I recommend that you do. But Esther is the one book in the Bible that doesn't mention God at all. Yep, you heard it here first. Esther is the book in the Bible that doesn't mention God at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch a random YouTube clip now, and this will go over the story of Esther. So sit back, enjoy. I'm going to ask you to do something with this in a few moments. Random YouTube clip, go.
Now it's time for a Bible story. There once lived a young girl named Esther. She lived with her adopted father Mordecai in the city of Susa, and they were secretly Jews. Now at that time, the Jewish people were under the rule of the Persian king Xerxes, who, as it happened, needed a new wife. King Xerxes brought together all the most beautiful girls of the land so they could pick a new wife. And one of these beautiful girls was Esther. These girls went through days and days of beauty treatments, and in time, Esther became favoured by everyone, and she was selected to be queen. Mordecai, Esther's father, would walk around the palace gates hoping to hear from Esther. And on one day, he overheard a plot by two of the king's guards to kill King Xerxes.
Nah, you do it.
Mordecai told Esther what he had heard, and Esther told the king, who dealt with the problem. Even though Mordecai saved the king's life, he never received an award, and the king never knew what he did. And then Mordecai found himself in trouble when a man named Haman rose to power. Haman was second in command to Xerxes and would command all people to bow down to him. But Mordecai wouldn't, as he would only bow down to God. Haman was furious and began plans to kill Mordecai and all the Jews. Haman created a law that all Jews must be killed, even the women and the children. So Mordecai went to Esther and begged her to speak to the king. But she was afraid, for if she visited the king without an invitation, she would be killed. But Esther responded to Mordecai, asking everyone to pray for her, and decided she would approach the king even if it meant death. Esther went to Xerxes, and because he loved her, he asked what it is that she wanted to ask him. She said, "If it pleases you, my lord, you and Haman are invited to a dinner I have prepared." Time came for the meal, and at the end of the meal, the king asked Esther again what she wanted. She replied, "Come with Haman tomorrow to another banquet. Then I will answer your question about what I want." That night, the king couldn't sleep and decided to look through his book of records. He then discovered that it was Mordecai that had saved his life and decided to do something great for him. Haman arrived and the king asked him what would be a way of celebrating such a great man. Now, Haman thought the king was talking about himself and suggested that a robe and a horse be provided for this great man to ride on. "Perfect," said the king, and commanded Haman to arrange those things for Mordecai. Haman wasn't pleased. The next day came and it was time for Esther's second dinner feast, and at the end of the meal, King Xerxes yet again asked Esther what it was she wanted. She responded, "If it pleases you, let me live. This is what I ask, and let my people live too, for Haman wishes to kill me and all other Jews." The king was furious and had Haman taken away, removing all his possessions and giving them to Mordecai, giving him the position of second in command.
Ooh, a hut.
The king wrote a new law for God's people, and Esther and Mordecai lived their life serving the king.
Okay, so thank you for watching that so diligently. I hope you enjoyed that clip as much as I did. So what I'd like you now to do is, in your workbooks, you will find a storyboard right towards the back of them, and I would like you to storyboard out the story of Esther, do some stick figures, make it look pretty, do whatever you want to with it, but get to know the story of Esther. Now, no, you're not going to be examined on it, but it is the link to how the Jews then started to get back to the Promised Land, because if it wasn't for Esther, the Jews would have been annihilated. Esther enabled the Jewish people to get weapons so they could be protected again. And this fits within the Jewish festival of Purim. So Egypt was Passover. You've got Sukkot, which happened during the time while they were in the desert, after the Exodus, before they got to the Promised Land. And here you've got Purim. So that's another key Jewish festival, which we'll come back to at another point. So I'd like you now to go to your booklet and do a storyboard based on what we've just talked about, and then we're going to return to me for a couple of exam questions. Okay, so if you remember back to our objectives, we said a good outcome if you retell the next events of the Tanakh's history, so that's King David through to the exile. A great outcome would be if you could explore how King David shaped Jewish history through his successes and failures, and we've talked about that. And even better, if we could evaluate if the return to Jerusalem was as important as when the Jews entered the Promised Land. So with that, what we're going to be thinking about is, was it, when they returned to Jerusalem, was it as good as when they went there with King David? And I think the answer to that comes back to our timeline. So if you look at the timeline there, you've got the return to Jerusalem. Things did improve, and that is the time when the temple is rebuilt, and that leads up to, for those of you with Christian history, that's when Jesus comes onto the scene. So if you get that labelled on your diagram as well, please. Okay, so exam question time. We are doing EduCAS. I know a lot of you will have already had exam technique through the relevant people that you've been learning about, but I'm specifically focusing on EduCAS. So if you use another board, the exam questions will probably fit, but maybe not the style of what I'm talking about. So to start with, this is a B question I'd like you to have a go at. The question is, describe how Moses changed Jewish history. So again, you're looking for 4 points and a quote, the quote being explained. One of those quotes would fit from the screen. That's my Judaism Shema, and they're all quotes from the Tanakh. So remember to say the Tanakh teaches and choose an appropriate quote. So 5 marks, 5 minutes, pause the clip, time yourself, and get yourself writing. Okay, that's brilliant, well done. The next one we're going to look at is an exam answer which has been written. The question, it's a D question, so it's an evaluative one. Moses is the most important person in Judaism. So I'd like you to look at this answer, and I'd like you to try and annotate around it. Well, you probably can't. Well, I'll put it on the Google Drive actually for you. But I'd like you to try and identify what the errors are, and to identify what score you would give it. So again, have a read of that now, download it from the Google Drive if you need to, and just see what score you would give it, or at least what band you would give it from the marking grid. Again, this is EduCAS specific. I'm not an examiner, so this is you making judgments and me guiding you on what I would with my pupils. Okay, what I like about this answer is that it compares Moses to somebody else. And with D questions, it's really important there's that comparison if the question lends itself to it. So the question on this one does, it says, was Moses the most important character? And I like the fact there's an alternative viewpoint that's gone in here. We start with Moses and move on to Abraham, and then there's a conclusion there as well, which is really good. Now, there's some obvious errors with this. So Jews in the first paragraph doesn't start with a capital. Egypt isn't spelled correctly. And there's quite a few SPAG errors with this. Now, there's no SPAG score in the Judaism paper if you're doing EduCast. However, it is obviously important to get your key spellings and terms correct. First thing you're looking for is there a quote, which yes, there is. So it therefore can be scoring a band 4. However, is it very good? Probably not. Is it good? Well, yes, it is a good detailed analysis. It does talk about the issue, and there are key terms that have been attempted to be spelled anyway. So it is a band 3 answer. It's probably just a 7, to be honest with you. Needs a little bit more to get higher, because that would be the difference between a good and a very good. But that is an example answer. It'd be interesting to see how you got in your grading of that. So you're now going to have a go at a D question. A 15-mark question should take 15 minutes, hopefully 12 minutes in reality. Unless you're awarded extra time, you'll know if you are. So this is the question. Again, I'm going to put it on the board, on the screen, sorry, and I would like you to pause the clip and give that a go. Okay, so the question is, Abraham was the most important Jewish character. So you've got to use all your learning that you've had over the last few weeks. Obviously, I don't think that's a particularly difficult question for you. So Abraham was the most important Jewish character. Okay, pause this clip and give it a go. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this session. Wasn't a particularly long one today, I get that, but it does bring us to a nice conclusion. So what we've done is we've thought particularly about that last outcome, evaluating if the return to Jerusalem was as important as when the Jews entered the Promised Land. And what we'll see next time is what's happened in the last 2,000 years. So next time I speak to you, we are going to cover 2,000 years worth of history. No pressure, but we can do it. So thank you for your time. Take care. God bless, and wash your hands. See you soon.